Have you been enjoying lunch? Good. I'd like to thank the presenters and the cooks and the servers and the cleaners and the people you never see behind the door back here. So, I'm very grateful. We're blessed to be filled with wonderful cooks. I have one at home too. I do. My wife is an incredible cook. I wash. And I get the better end of the deal every time. Who was not here last time when we spoke? Good. Who was here last time when we spoke? Good. Hopefully they add up to 100%. So welcome those that were here and those that weren't. So those that don't know, I'm Dr. Jim Said, and we are renewed back to Orofino the last 3 years or so. I've been in practice first in Portland and then in Southern Oregon for 44 years, and then up here for the last 3 years, 2.5. It'll be 3 years next February. So we've been at this for a while, and it's been a pure joy being in practice. I'm a naturopath and a chiropractor, so my practice is all natural health care, general and family practice. So I tell my patients from birth to death, from common cold to cancer. So we've seen a lot over the years. And it's a pleasure to present with you today. I've got a lot of ground to cover in a short time. So hopefully you can hear fast. So the focus is on a word we all are too familiar with called what? Stress. Thank you. Very good. Now, do you know the definition of stress? Okay. Have you ever heard of Dr. Hans Selye? S-E-Y-L-E, Hans Selye out of France. He's regarded as the founder or the father of stress research. And he came up with what's called the general adaptation syndrome. GAS for short. And I got the biggest kick out of studying his work decades ago. And in France, they had no term for stress. So when he came up with the word for stress in English, from English, and did the research on stress, they convened a 3-day conference in Paris to come up with a French word for stress. You know what they came up with? Les stress. I thought, well, that makes sense. So he defined stress very, very simply. How do you define stress? You're here to tell me what stress is, what it means. On the large level, what would you call it? Pardon?
Pressure.
Pressure. Stress as pressure, no question. Disruption of normal life. Pain is part of it, no question. Anxiety is part of it. So you know how he defined it? Excuse me. Anything that increases the rate of wear and tear on the body. Anything that increases the rate of wear and tear on the body. That covers a lot of ground. It can be emotional stress, relational stress, psychological stress, mental stress, physical stress, pressure, thermal stress, too hot, too cold, chemical stress, from toxins in the environment to our foods, etc., too much food. Anything increases the rate of wear and tear on our body. That covers an immense amount of ground. So what I'm going to go over with you today is something very simple. Who doesn't have stress? then you're all in the right place. So, yes.
They would have to be blind and deaf.
And dead. That's right. And dead. So you may feel like you qualify, but not quite. There's also what's called distress and eustress. Distress damages, eustress actually helps heal. And where there's stress, now I was an engineer before I became a physician in mechanical engineering, product design, and bioengineering. So this was ingrained in me at college. Where there's stress, there's always strain. Thank you. That's another engineer. I'm so grateful. Where there's stress, there's strain. Stress is the force, strain is the deformation under the force or the change under that force. So if you put stress on a beam, it's going to strain. It's going to have a change in shape or forces on it. If you put stress in your life, there's going to be change in your life. If there's stress on the physical body, there's going to be physical change on the physical body. Now, back in the late 70s, early 80s, for about 5 years, another gentleman and I, this guy was down in Southern California, in Long Beach. He was an orthopedist, chiropractic orthopedist. He had done 25 years on full spine x-rays, trying to understand how stresses change the structure. And he was trying to understand scoliosis. So he had immense amount of data, but it wasn't making sense. So I joined him, and the two of us took 5 years to unravel the data. And after 5 years, we did it. And we showed how the body changes from stresses over time, creating structural changes like scoliosis. Not a pathologic scoliosis, but a functional scoliosis like we all have. If you look at the spine, it's going to be curved here and there. That doesn't happen for no reason. It's a strain response to the stresses on the body, of all kinds of stress. We found the primary stress is brain dominance. You have left and right brain dominance, left brain and right brain. Right brain is more feminine, as they say, and left brain more masculine. Right brain is more nonlinear, left brain is more linear. There's interesting bicameral brain studies, as they're called, showing the differences between the male and female brain. I won't go through that today. It's long. It's hilarious. And what the brain dominant pattern starts the stresses in the pelvis and then all the way up the body. So I'm going to show you some of that today as we look at strain on the body. But we also correlated stress with chemistry. We correlate it with lifestyle. We correlate it with our way of thinking. And that worked across the board in our research. So I'm going to share some of that with you today. But I want to look at the basic concept first. So when Hans Selye did his research, he found that one thing I like, all right, that in the general adaptations study, stresses cause certain responses in the body. Now, if a deer is out in the woods and it hears something crack, what does the deer do? It's on hyper alert. It stiffens. When it knows that it's not going to be threatened, what does the deer do? Before it goes back to eating, what does it do? It will shiver. And that shiver releases the stresses in the body, the strain in the body. Okay? The nervous system goes, I'm not going to be eaten. I don't have to run away. I can go back and eat my food. And it shivers and discharges that stress. When we're under stress, what do? We tense up. When we notice that the stress is gone, what do? We don't de-stress. We don't discharge. We hold it. Now, men tend to hold it, I've noticed, in their low backs. Women tend to hold it in their shoulders. They try to glue them to the ears. This is not uncommon. And men feel it in the low back and the belly, commonly. Not always, but commonly. But we hold stress and we tend not to discharge. Why? Now that's a big statement, by the way. We don't realize how. We've gotten accustomed to it. I look at it and
That's how damaging it is to people.
we don't realize the damage that's being done to us. But I have to say there's one foundational reason that I found. We don't trust God. Bottom line. That's been my experience. When I can trust in the Lord and say, Lord, I'm in your hands, I can now rest. If I can't trust in the Lord, I can't rest. There's no place to go. So for me, this is my experience, when I don't trust in the Lord and I'm under something that's stressful, I'll feel my body tighten up. But when I realize, Lord, you're in charge. My life is in your hands, and I give you my life. I trust you with whatever you choose to do with me. And that was my experience, by the way. When I came to him, I said, Lord, I'm yours. I don't want I don't want to take charge anymore. I did a bad job. I trust the job you're going to do. Here, I'm yours. So when we trust, that stress can discharge. It's got a place to go in the Lord, in rest. Now, let's look at the effect of stress over time. Then we're going to look at the effects of stress in the body, hormonally, physically, structurally, in the brain, etc. So when we're in a lifetime, over time, we find that in our childhood, we develop certain strategies for coping or adapting. Now, who are our major teachers? Yes, we have a problem. We all have parents. They taught us how to adapt, how to speak, how to listen, how to think, how to emote, how to relate, how to move, how to not. We all have parents. Can't get away from it. I apologize to my kids often. What can you do? So we build a state of adaptation and strategies to adapt that stay with us through our lifetime. And I do a lot of counseling. I've developed counseling techniques over about 15 years, and I started teaching them throughout US and Europe. And they were based on understanding the strategies of how we adapt. And there are an amazing array of strategies that we've all developed. And each one of us unique. The problem is when we adapt in childhood, we learn to love our parents by being the way they are. If we're like them, they will like us. And if they like us, they keep us around. And so we can survive. That's a big deal. And so we tend to adapt those strategies that they adapted unless they're healthy parents. Healthy parents differentiate themselves from their children. Now, when you're born, the very first capacity your nervous system has is called what? I just told you. Differentiation. The nervous system has now the capacity to differentiate self from non-self. Me from mom, me from dad. Okay? That's called differentiation. A healthy parent differentiates him or herself from the child, saying, I'm not you and you're not me. I will live my life and you'll live your life. I'm here to support you and love you and care for you, but not live for you. And you're here to live your life, not my life. That's healthy parenting. But parents don't understand that classically, especially new parents, and they glom onto the child and want the child to be a mini-me without realizing that's what's going on, and they start teaching the child their adaptive strategies, which a child takes on without thinking. And many times it's generational. You've heard of epigenetics, right? We have a genome and we also have an epigenome. On the histones over our genome, we have 4 chemistries that are our epigenome that define what of our genome is given expression and what of our genome is not given expression. That's a big deal. Now we have genes that code for health and we have genes that code for disease. Our histone pattern in our epigenome in great measure determines what of our genome is expressed for health or for disease. So if we are taught to worry and be anxious and not trust in the Lord, and we have fears that are generational, we don't understand them, but we live them out anyway. We don't even realize they're generational. We take those on, and we start seeing familial patterns of disease. You may have noticed. It's not just the way we eat alone, it's the way we think, the way we adapt. So we do these adaptation strategies in our childhood, and we finally form a persona, and the brain doesn't fully develop until we're about 26 years old. You ever been married before 26? The brain's not fully developed. I'll leave it at that. After, then we start using those adaptive strategies, and we find that they're progressively less effective in life. And we find that our body starts to go into a progressively less and less efficient functionality. And we go through 4 stages of change. Now, Hans Selye described 3 changes called alarm, resistance, and exhaustion. I'll explain what those are. When we did research with his work, and we added it to the work we were doing, we had to add a fourth one called degeneration. So go from alarm, it's called the alarm reaction, to resistance, to exhaustion, to, what do I call it? Degeneration. You may identify with some of these words. So, the first response we have is an alarm reaction. We realize something's off, and we adapt to it best we can. The alarm response is actually very healthy. The body's alerted to saying, I need to adapt to whatever the circumstances are, to a life situation, to food, to where we live. If you live in an inner city, Chicago, if you're living in the mountains of Idaho, you adapt. And your body's going to be successful or not. If we're successful, we stay healthy. We stay functional. If we're not, we start to degrade. When we degrade, we go into a state of resistance. Or we have energy available to us, but it's not infinite. What happens over time? Over time, we tend to dissipate. We lose energy. We lose capacity of functionality. We'll talk about senescence in a moment. You ever heard that term, senescence? Aging. Okay? It has its moments. So in the aging process, we go through resistance. Resistance is actually resisting degeneration, resisting collapse. So structurally, I'll show you something. This is fascinating to me. If you look at the body structure, here's the pelvis, sacrum, here's the diaphragm, the shoulders, the neck, the head, artist conception. And here's your knees, ankles, feet. Okay. What happens now in an alarm state, suppose we're dealing with a right brain person, which is feminine. Okay? Let's just take an example. You flip it for a left brain pattern. If a person's right brain and they're going to an alarm phase, the low back here's left and right. So chiropractors look at the body opposite than MDs. Right? If you look at an x-ray, chiropractors always look at it from the back. MDs always look at it from the front. So I always have to flip in my brain who took the film. So here's a low back to the left slightly. The pelvis goes up slightly on the left. I'll put it in red. This is what we found after about 25 years of x-ray research. So the low back will deviate slightly to the left. The pelvis will come up slightly on the left. The legs will stay equal length. The spine will then deviate to the right above the diaphragm, and the head will be to the right of the center of the sacrum. Okay? Basic concept. That's an alarm state. Now, if you look at the side view, here's the tailbone. It's at a 45-degree angle. The low back goes forward. The center of the low back sits right over the sacrum. Then the mid-back comes back. The upper back and neck come this way, and the head sits right over the tailbone. And here's the hip, here's the knee, here's the ankle. That's ideal. In an alarm, that's what that looks like. That's how it should be. And it's very efficient posture. We had that posture when we were like 3 on a good day. Then what happens? We adapt. Now, a male pattern will adapt just the opposite. In fact, we used to think about a dating service. Could match spines, see what it looked like. It was a concept that never really went up. You know. It's a pretty cool idea, though. Now, what happens in resistance? In resistance, the energy gets used more strongly. It takes a lot of energy to resist collapsing. So the first thing we see is the sacrum goes up higher and the low back goes even forward. It's called a hyperlordosis. Okay, the butt sticks up way, way out and back. The mid-back comes back further and the neck pulls back this way and the atlas goes up higher. Okay, and you see people with a hyperlordosis in the neck, hyperkyphosis in the mid-back, low back does this, and the body goes even further in this kind of position, and then the low back starts to get unstable. It can do all kinds of things at that point. When you continue, now you start to go into what? What's the next phase? Exhaustion. With exhaustion, you can't maintain this. Okay? You can't maintain it physiologically, metabolically, structurally, emotionally, relationally. How long can you put up with someone you don't care for? That works? Okay. And then you get exhausted. Okay? So what happens now is the sacrum starts to flatten. And the low back starts to lose its lordosis. And the mid-back starts to shift forward. And now we start going in front of what's called the gravity stress line over the sacrum this way. Okay? And then the pelvis drops to the opposite side. The low back goes even further to the side it shouldn't. And then we start getting scoliosis patterns, adaptive patterns. That's what happens in exhaustion structurally. The last thing is what? With degeneration, what do you think happens? It all collapses. The sacrum goes down to almost a zero base angle. You lose the low back contour. You go forward. The head sits way in front. And you can do best by looking at your toes. And then the shoulders start to round in. The feet start to splay out. And this is how we walk. You ever seen anyone like this? It's not an epitome of vitality. All right? It's exhaustion. It's deep exhaustion into degeneration. And then the spine just goes into chaos at that point. So we see this. We've mapped these things out on over 25,000 films on 25 years, seeing this pattern routinely, consistently. We found it was absolutely following this pattern to a T. And a lot's been written about it and published. I never published because I've had no time. I have 3 other books to finish first, and then I'll write that one. I wish I was exaggerating, but I'm not. So what happens is we start seeing these changes structurally. We also see them physiologically in our body chemistries. Now, this was fascinating to me. We see chemistries, and I do a lot of lab evaluation. So we see these changes going on in fat metabolism, cholesterol issues, mineral metabolism, pH of the body. These things start to shift over time. I'm not going to go through detail, but I just appreciate that we see these same kinds of patterns happening in our body chemistry. We see them happening psychologically. Psychologically, we can't adapt efficiently anymore. We fatigue, we give up. Or our old patterns catch up with us, and that's all we live out. To change is not so easy. And in degeneration, it's well cemented in. So what happens over time is the cells lose integrity. Now let me show you something here. When you look at a cell structure, here's 2 cells, here's the nucleus. These are healthy cells. They've got tone. They maintain their structural integrity. They're strong. They're vibrant. They divide and replace themselves with daughter populations that are stronger than the parent population. That's normal. Have you ever heard of the term apoptosis? Yes? I didn't make it up. It took me a while to appreciate the term. Apoptosis is the technical term for normal cell dividing or cell death. It's called programmed cell death. All of our cells are designed to die. And when they die, they recycle their constituents and get reused in the next population of cells. So the new cell population is stronger than the old cell population. That's how we're designed. That's called repair and recovery. What happens over time, as we go into these exhausted degenerative modes, the cells don't die. You know what we call a non-dying cell? You'll love the term. It's called a senescent cell. We also call it a zombie cell. That's in the medical literature. They're called zombie cells. They don't die. They just go on and get uglier and uglier. Now, that's a term used by scientists to describe what a zombie cell or senescent cell looks like. It gets ugly. It's not an aspersion on anybody. We're all going through this. So the cell doesn't die. It starts to separate apart, and it gets very big. And the nucleus gets very large. And as that happens, the cell itself starts to inflame. That's what happens to a left brain pattern, a right brain pattern. There we go. So what happens is the cell starts to become more like a blob. It literally gets bigger. It loses integrity on the cell surrounding, the perimeter of it. The nucleus gets too big, and it starts to inflame. And it starts to inflame other cells next to it, and it causes other cells to become zombie cells next to it. Then it forms cytokines, which are toxic inflammatory products, and that's what starts happening to the body over time. We start losing integrity, we start losing muscle tone, skin tone, we wrinkle and sag and weaken, literally, and we start spreading out. We don't have that toned tissue. And that's from zombie cells being formed, senescent cells. You might be wondering how to change this. That's what I'm going to go over with you. Now, here, pardon? I'm coming to it. So what happens is, over time, as stresses continue and mount and we adapt less and less effectively, and we spend more and more time on this planet, in this body, we find that our reserves start breaking apart. They start losing integrity. Now, what's the energy generating cell, part of the cell? What's it called? The mitochondria. Heard of them? Okay. Mitochondria. You have hundreds of thousands per cell at times. And these mitochondria are the energy generating plants of the cell. Now, they're prolific in healthy cells. They start losing numbers in zombie cells. So zombie cells become less and less energetic. They can't divide, etc. So as that happens, we start losing energy over time. Now, mitochondria are most prolific in the morning, and they're slowest at night. We'll get to cortisol and show you how that maps the same pattern. So what happens is, in the morning, we're more energetic. That's when we can ideally exercise. That's when the biggest meal would happen of the day, because we can digest more efficiently and effectively. But over time, throughout the day, the mitochondria lose energy. They don't produce ATP as efficiently, and we don't digest as effectively. We can't manage through the physical activities that we need, and it's time for sleep and regeneration. Now, the research in how to reverse zombiness or senescence is about 1.5 years old. It's new research to how to reverse this pattern. I was first introduced to it in the world of oncology and cancer. We're called cancer stem cells. Have you ever heard of those? All right. Cancer stem cells are in our bodies, and someone who's had cancer tends to get cancer later in life because the cancer stem cells became zombie cells and never died. They didn't go through normal cell apoptosis. So research is coming out to show us how to actually destroy cancer stem cells, as well as how to allow senescent cells to go through normal apoptosis and to bring back cell division and reduce the inflammation and cytotoxic reactions causing degeneration of the organs. Now, do you want to know how to do that? I'm glad you asked. All right. So I'm going to talk about it generically, and I'm going to talk about it specifically. Always spiritually. So here's the good news. Let me give you the good news first. Anywhere we are along this pattern, there's always the opportunity for recovery. It's never too late to actually heal. And I see this all the time in practice. I see people coming in with things I thought, how do you start this process of recovery? And I pray a lot. I said, Lord, show me the way in. Where do I go? Just find a crack. Give me a way in. And he does. And when we find those ways in, and it's individual completely. Some people are wide open, other people don't know why they're there. So my first question to people like that is, do you want to live? If you want to live, I can help you. If you don't, I'm going to suggest you see a mortician, and I'm not. I'm a physician, not a mortician. So I'm not for you. I've never had anyone say, I don't want to live. Even when confronted, when they were contemplating not living. Inherent in each of us is the desire to live. Now, so we can shift to a higher state of functionality from any level. That's the good news. Now, here are the keys that I found clinically. Where do you think it starts? With what we eat. I'll come to thoughts in a moment. But what we eat, the thoughts dictate in great measure what we eat. So I'm going to look at just food. What I have found is many people eat foods that are pro-inflammatory, that continue the process of degeneration and zombiness, if you will, senescence, aging, but they don't want to change anything. They like their sodas, they like their beer, they like their coffee, they like their ice cream, they like their sugar. Or the other things that they like that the body doesn't. But they can't contemplate, they can't even imagine doing life differently than they've always done it. So how do you think you can appeal to someone's reason and heart and yearning for healing? I'm asking that question. Give them hope. How? Pardon? Pray. How else? Pardon? An example is a great start. Prayer is essential. Education is a key. But it has to be unique to that individual. You have to meet them where they live. That's the key. Meet them where they are. You can't give them an example of something a year hence, but meet them where they are now. So here's how I found to do that. This is just a way I found over the years. One thing I do is I test foods. I test for food reactivities. It's a blood testing that we use. I test for food reactivities. Now, you're not going to do this with patients you know yourself, but I found that people that come to me are sick. They're in pain. Their fear is heightened because they're afraid of what possibly could happen. But they don't know what to do. How do I change this? And if I just said, here's how I'd like you to eat, they go, say what? But when I show them from their own body, this is what your body is telling me. I'm not determining this. If you're going to argue with me, you're arguing against your own chemistry, your own body itself. Antibodies to foods that your body's created to those foods. So I'm going to be the messenger. Don't kill the messenger. I have a message for you from your own body. I'm your body's advocate. If you're not going to advocate for your body, I will. But I'm going to teach you how until you start advocating for your own health. So it's a transition that happens. So I actually measure the antibodies against their foods. We test like 190 foods. And I test the actual quantitative antibodies to those foods. And it tells me what foods they tolerate and what foods they don't. What foods cause inflammation and to what extent their inflammation is going on. And I go, okay, here's the deal. Now, there's things that I find unique to each individual and things that are generic. Let me go over the generic ones with you first. These are things I see routinely from research. The first thing I always ask someone is, are you eating sugar? You know what the answer is every time? Thank you. At least you're honest. This is good. I appreciate it. So let me start uncovering. They say, well, not very much. Then I hear, all I have is a little bit of, and I go, I know exactly where we're headed. I've heard this 10,000 times. I tell my patients, there's nothing you can tell me that I haven't already heard. And that I found that to be the case by now. So they start enumerating the little bits of things they have, and I go, yes, and they add up. Well, only every other week, yes, and for your body, it adds up. You can't do that. I had a gentleman, 85, last week. He's an ex-Marine, an old codger. He loves being gruff, and he's got a heart of gold, and I love this guy. His skin was just gnarled with lesions everywhere, large lesions covering his entire skin, itching and driving him crazy. So I worked with him now for about 2 months. We shifted the diet, we shifted the chemistries, we got him back on track, and he was recovering. The lesions were drying up, the skin was coming back. Then he started getting these little punctate lesions all over his body, itching again. I said, okay, where's the sugar coming from? So I just had a little bit of da-da-da-da-da. I said, you can have none. Repeat after me. No sugar. He repeated after me. I think his wife was, I had a witness. And so, but he got it. A little bit goes a long way in doing damage. It's a stress to the system. He can't adapt to it. He keeps taking himself back down. So, sugar, big issue. And refined carbs. White flour products of any kind, polished grains, white rice, etc. Now, food has 8 things in it that you don't want to mess up. Vitamins, minerals, proteins, fats, starches, phytonutrients, moisture, and fiber. Okay? That's what's in food. The Lord provided that in the garden. He told us to eat out of the garden. Find food that's in the garden. You can plant a seed and it comes up as something edible. I tell my patients, you can't plant a chicken. It's not going to come up. All right? So those 8 constituents are in foods in a blend that is perfect for that food's digestion, assimilation, metabolism, and elimination. The 4 parts of how we get nutrients in through the body. We have to digest it. You have to break it from big to small. That's digestion. Then you have to metabolize it. You have to get it into across the membrane of the gut, into the liver to metabolize it. Then you distribute it through the body so you can utilize it. Then you have to, what? Eliminate it. Get rid of the waste. Okay, that's how we're designed. Those 8 constituents allow that to occur with the foods in nature, in the garden. If you refine the food, you've just disrupted those 8 nutrients, the mix of those. And then you call it enriching. That's called marketing. It's called impoverishing. You've impoverished the food, trying to make it something it never was intended to be, without the moisture, without the fiber, without the nutrients, without the macronutrients, without the micronutrients, without the phytonutrients. And then we take that food into the body, but the body still requires those nutrients that were taken out. So where do they come from?
Only if it takes supplements.
Where do they come from? They come from our body. So we start pulling from our own stores, creating deficiency diseases of all kinds. Now, one of my fields is neurochemistry. We do a lot of work in the world of brain chemistry. And the research that's coming out of that world is incredible, because it's showing that our diets are becoming so deficient in nutrients we require to make brain hormones that we're losing the capacity to make brain hormones. And I see it also familially that many people have lost the capacity genetically to make the brain neurochemistries. And they're prone to anxiety, prone to depression, prone to OCD. Common patterns, very common. Prone to restlessness. They can't quiet the brain. They worry incessantly. You can't turn the brain off at night. especially. So sleep is a thing of the past for many people, especially postmenopausal women. Not an easy state to go through. I have great respect for women and what they go through childbearing years and menopausal years. It's not easy. Men go through andropause, so-called male menopause. But that comes a little later in life for men, and they have their own issues with that. But women go through that menopausal pattern, and it's extremely difficult on the metabolism and the physiology of the body. So when we're not getting nutrients in foods, it's a big deal. It's affecting our brain, it's affecting our gut, it's affecting every cell of our body, and affects the degenerative process. So now we're promoting more and more senescence and zombiness, aging. So sugars and refined carbs are a big, big deal in that arena. Now I mentioned you can't plant a chicken, or a turkey, or a fish, or a moose. Okay? So I look at flesh foods as another stressor to the system. Now these foods are high in what's called arachidonic acid. Have you ever heard of arachidonic acid? It's a pro-inflammatory fatty acid. We have it in our body, in the cells of our body. But we don't eat our body, hopefully. Mammals have it in their flesh, in their tissues. You find it high in eggs and high in dairy. I call those flesh foods. They're high in arachidonic acid. They're pro-inflammatory fatty acids. When we eat those foods, those fatty acids get incorporated in the cells of our body. Now, this blows me away. Here's a cell. Artist conception again. A cell is a bilipid membrane on the outside. It's fatty membranes, and the nucleus is inside the cell. In this fatty membrane, you have proteins sticking through. Do you know how many? 50,000. It's a lot. 50,000. And they are called amphoteric. They're one charge on one side and opposite charge on the other side. I call them antennae. These are protein structures. These are protein structures that are sensitive to two things: chemistries. So when you have nutrients going through the body, or hormones, or endocrine or exocrine or signaling molecules going through the system, they're picked up by the cell. And they're picked up, and when they're picked up, they allow certain effector cells and receptor cells to open up. So the receptor cells let nutrients in, and the effector cells allow that to happen. And when that nutrient is tagged here, a signal is sent to the nucleus to send a structure to open up the effector and receptor cells to connect them, to let the body take in the nutrient. Then it saturates, they let go, and that gate closes. And that happens with everything we take into the cell. It's just mind-boggling and beautiful. But the other thing it picks up is called frequencies. All right? You've heard of electromagnetic smog? 5G towers, 4G, 3G, radio waves, television waves. These are called electromagnetic smog. We're picking those up all the time. We're only now beginning to get an inkling and idea of just how damaging they can be to our bodies, even from cell phones. It's not the heat, it's the frequencies themselves. Now, you have a large frequency generator in your own body. You know what it's called? Pardon? The brain. The brain, your thoughts. Now let this one in. My wife had mentioned prayer, and I'm grateful she's here. The brain is generating thoughts continually, even when you don't want them to be. It's generating thoughts continually. The quality of the thoughts determine what happens in our health. Okay? Now, you have two kinds of nervous systems. You have an AC nervous system and a DC nervous system. The AC nervous system is called an active potential system. And so it's a two-neuron system, and you trigger one, it triggers the second one, and you get a response. That's how most nerves in the body work. But in the 80s, another nervous system was found. That's a DC nervous system. They called it the healing nervous system. Healing. And what happens is information is transmitted simultaneously throughout the entire body. Through the glial system and the Schwann cell system. We used to think these as packing cells or covering cells, but it turns out that they make a whole nother network of a nervous system function. And so information is transmitted through the body simultaneously, everywhere, instantaneously. It's a DC system. So we call it a healing system. Now, that system is carrying information constantly from our brain to the entire body. And the body's responding constantly to that. And it's being pumped or pulsed by the heart. The heart's the strongest electromagnetic impulse of the body. You ever seen an EKG? Right? You can pick it up at the extremities and find the rhythmicity of the heart. And the EEG, electroencephalogram of the brain, is also measuring the frequency patterns and electric characteristics of the brain. Those two can entrain, or they can be at odds with each other. Right? When they entrain, they can train for good or for bad. You can have thoughts that are of anger and sadness and grief, remorse, revenge, repentance. You have all kinds of possibilities that can entrain the brain to the heart for good or for evil. If it's for good, we find that it's a rhythmic pattern, regular and rhythmic. What we generate is gratitude and peace. If it's for bad, it's erratic, and it generates distortions in the physiology of our body every time. And it's carried instantaneously to every cell of the body. So if your thoughts are thoughts of the world, whoa, do not watch the news. It's propaganda at best. If you believe 1% of it, you're believing too much. I do a lot of studies of history and historical biblical prophecy. In fact, we're teaching it at our place. We're writing books on it now to get them published this next year. So I do a lot of study about world events, but I don't believe anything I hear about the news. Okay? It's a distortion. But if you tend to believe that stuff and you get caught up in it, guess what's going to happen? It's going to affect us adversely. We get worried, we get upset, we buy the Kool-Aid, as they say. Okay, we buy the lie, and we get upset by it. We want it to be. We want it to be something it can't be. So, when we're entertaining thoughts on the Lord, it's a different world altogether. Okay? Those thoughts of God, thoughts of His love, they have an entirely different effect on our body. How do we do that? Always. A merry heart is wonderful for the health. It's awesome medicine. So when we stay focused in prayer on the Lord and not let the world intervene, and if it tries, stay in prayer. The Bible says, how often should we pray? Unceasing. How often should we rejoice? Always. That's right. So when things are bad, don't wait until they're good before you rejoice. Don't deprive yourself of that time you could have rejoiced in the Lord when things are bad, and then you get to watch how He makes it good. I learned that a long time ago. When things are really bad, I thought, how long are they going to stay this way? Well, they recovered. The Lord intervenes every time. So when things get off and bad, I go, no, I'm going to wait to see how this turns out. Okay? That saved my life years ago when I was in college. That's why I'm here today. I got that. Does weeping dissipate anxiety? That's a good point. It depends. If the weeping has hope, then yes. If the weeping is hopeless, then no. Hope dissipates anxiety. Thank you. I know. So the point is this. I love it. No question. So with frequencies affecting the cell, our thoughts dictate the status of our physiology and our chemistry. Every time. So when your thoughts are going to be distorted, what do you think is going to happen to the cell? It's going to degenerate. We'll go into zombiness. When our thoughts are of God, and we trust in the Lord, and we can rest, what's going to happen to our physiology? It can recover. That's right. And we can make the decisions we need to make for health, and we're okay with that because they're compatible with how the Lord designed us. So let's go further. So flesh foods we talked about as being dissipative, pro-inflammatory. There's another group. When I look at refined carbs, what's the most refined carb of all? Pardon? Alcohol. The most refined carb of all. It gets invited to the cell without requiring insulin. So it goes right into the cell, creates fatty congestion of the liver consistently. It deteriorates the brain, pickles it, and it's a fuel we can't use. Now, jams, jellies, and fruit juices are metabolized in the liver the same as alcohol. Did you catch that? Jams, jellies, and fruit juices, high fructose. High amounts of honey, you got it. Honey also. You can overdo it. Now we can generally tolerate some maple syrup. Some people can tolerate coconut palm nectar. Stevia and monk fruit are generally well tolerated to not drive up sugar levels. But be careful with excess high fructose input. Okay? It's uninvited to the liver, and it can cause fatty congestion of the liver. And it's pro-inflammatory. So the question is, sugar and raw beet okay? Enjoy your beets. It's not refined. Okay. Now, the next group are stimulants. Now, I'm asking you to have a very thick skin. Coffee, sodas, power drinks, black tea, and chocolate. Ooh. Pardon? Black chocolate, any color. In chocolate, it's called theobromine. In tobacco, it's nicotine. In coffee, it's caffeine. In black tea, it's theophylline. They're the same methylxanthine group chemically. It's theobromine in chocolate. If you look at who's funding the research on chocolate's good benefits, it's called Nestle. Follow the money. Okay. So stimulants are hard on the liver, the vascular system, and the brain. Now, when you're carting this stuff into the body has to deal with it. It's toxic to the system. So you now have a detoxing process in the body you're taxing. If you overwhelm the body's detoxing process, you start storing poisons throughout the tissues of the body. Fat-soluble toxins especially are stored where? What's the most fat-soluble part of your body? The brain, and also fatty tissue, especially mental belly fat. But in the brain, you store toxins in the brain. What do you think is going to happen over time as you store toxins in the brain? Neurodegeneration. And we're seeing more and more conditions of neurodegeneration all the time. Parkinson's, absolutely on the rise, as an example. And I see many, many Parkinson's patients all over the country, regularly. So neurodegeneration is a big issue and increasing. Now, the next in that same arena is called bad fats. Bad fats. What are bad fats?
Soy, cottonseed.
You're catching on. Good. So bad fats are going to be things like trans fats, hydrogenated fats, partially hydrogenated fats, esterified fats, margarine. Fats are in oils designed to be liquid at room temperature. They're triglycerides. They have a glycerol backbone and carbon chains. So they're designed to flow at room temperature. When they try to make that solid at room temperature, they make that spiculed. They add hydrogen, that's why it's called hydrogenation, which stiffens the fat, making it solid at room temperature. Crisco. Pardon? Solid at room temperature. No, that melts at 85 degrees. So if it melts at 85, it's fine. Coconut oil is designed to melt at 85 degrees. It's solid before that. But Crisco isn't. We've had some very interesting stories at restaurants using Crisco. I won't go into that right now, but you can shape them at all kinds of things. They shouldn't be able to. So bad fats include your solid fats at room temperature that shouldn't be solid. Trans fats. Also, fried fats. When you fry a fat, it becomes carcinogenic. It becomes what's called a benzpyrene-like ring structure. That structure is carcinogenic. The damage is done to the fat when the oil changes color or smokes. Okay? It starts getting dark or it smokes. You've just changed the structure to a benzpyrene-like structure, and it's going to cause browning on the food. Another issue. So just be attentive to that. It does. It kinks the molecule. The next is animal fats. Animal fats are all high in what? What do I call them? Arachidonic acid, pro-inflammatory fatty acid. The industrial oils are just toxic. The industrial oils are genetically modified principally, things like canola, corn, cottonseed, and soy. Canola oil was never intended for human consumption. You know what canola stands for? You ever studied this history? Canadian oil, Canada oil, canola. It was made in Canada. When cows would eat the canola seed, they'd go blind. It's toxic. So they modified it to reduce the toxicity so that it could be sold cheaply as an oil. Right. So the acknowledgement is cow feed was sent over to Europe when the mad cow disease was an issue, and they're sending canola seed pulp. It's a toxic substance. Just say no. Okay? Do not consume canola oil if you can help it at all. But it's dirt cheap because the way it's manufactured, and 95 to 98% of it's genetically modified. So it doesn't work. Now, the other group is called fermented concentrates. So when you take an hydrogenated fat, one of those bad fats, it incorporates in the cell membrane. The cell membrane becomes pro-inflammatory. But also what happens, at Stanford, when they did the research on those, they called them death oils. And the reason they call them death oils, thank you, is it incorporates in the cell membrane, and it causes the cell membrane to rupture. When it ruptures, the contents of the cell, the cytoplasm, leaks out and the cell dies. That's what saturated fats do, or partially hydrogenated fats. It kills you. It can't, once you take it in, see, it's a polarized double bond of carbon. That's how they're made. And when you polarize a double bond, we have no enzyme in our body to break that down. So we can't get rid of it. You can't get rid of it. You're stuck with it. And when it incorporates in the cell membrane, it will always rupture the cell membrane. This cell membrane will rupture, and it kills the cell. Yes, it does. They're called death oils. Pardon? Well, as long as you're alive, when you're dead, it's going to compost with everything else, but that doesn't do you any good at that point. Fermented concentrates. Fermented concentrates are twofold. First is vinegar, even apple cider vinegar. Now, I started reading about, people were sending me all kinds of stuff about apple cider vinegar and its benefits. I thought, let me do a study on vinegar. So I studied vinegar, and they're all 6% acetic acid or more, including apple cider vinegar. And they cause proteins to rot in the stomach. Vinegar was used to break meat down to make it more tender. So it's causing them to rot or putrefy in the stomach. It's the wrong pH. So vinegar doesn't work. You can use lemon or lime instead, and that works fine, but not vinegar. The other is soy sauce. It's a fermented concentrate that doesn't work. Now with soy sauce, the soybean is a whole other world. I've read a bunch of books and papers on soy, looking at the benefits and the not benefits. And the issues that I find principally an issue are soy will cause vitamins and minerals to not be assimilated in the stomach. It disrupts protein assimilation in the stomach. It causes also red blood cells to clump. This does not include the phytoestrogens in soy, which many men don't tolerate or do well with. Others claim it's desirable to take in. You can take it as tofu or tempeh. It's still soy. So I'm just careful with that. So if you have soy, really in moderation. Be very careful with that.
Can they substitute coconut aminos for soy sauce?
So let's look at soy sauce in a moment. I'll look at it right now. So soy sauce is what's called a free glutamate. This has to do with artificial flavorings. You've heard of MSG?
Oh, yeah.
Monosodium glutamate? That's not the only glutamate that's available. They're called free glutamates. When you heat up soy, like heating up nutritional yeast that was mentioned here, they become free glutamates. They're MSG repackaged. That's all it is, MSG repackaged, which is a neurotoxin. It causes neurodegeneration. So just say no. So when you're taking that in, you'll find it also in yeasts that say autolyzed or hydrolyzed. You ever seen those on the label? That's just MSG repackaged. Or fake meats that say texturized or proteolyzed, like fake hamburgers and hot dogs, Loma Linda, Worthington Foods, these kinds of things that are made out of usually soy or gluten. But if it says proteolyzed or texturized, it's nothing more than MSG repackaged. It's a free glutamate. So just be attentive to that. Don't put it in the body. Now, the other group, that's part of another larger group called neurotoxins. So neurotoxins are also called excitotoxins. You may have heard that term. Blaylock wrote a great book about excitotoxins, well done, a neurosurgeon. And, pardon? Blaylock, excitotoxins. That's the name of the book. And so artificial sweeteners, artificial flavors, artificial colors and dyes don't work. They're toxic to the liver and to the brain and the vascular system. You start putting these toxins elsewhere that you have to deal with. Now, when you deal with a poison in the body has a very specific protocol to deal with this. It's called the biotransformative system or detoxing system. You have enzymes that are designed to break those toxins down at the tissue level themselves, to convert them into something that's water soluble that can be carted off through the vascular system to the liver. Along the way, they can damage the vascular system. So you have antioxidants to protect the vascular system. When you come to the liver, you have other enzymes to break them down, to put them into a water-soluble coating so they can be taken out through the gallbladder and through the colon or through the kidneys and the urine or through the skin and sweat or through the breath as routes of elimination. But if you don't have those enzymes in place or those protein structures in place or the antioxidants in place, you can't do that and you become progressively more toxic in your system. It's a big issue. One thing that's necessary is water and exercise, movement. The diaphragm, right here, the respiratory diaphragm, is crucial to stabilize body structure, but it's also essential for digestion and elimination. Why? The liver sits right under the diaphragm on the right side, the spleen's on the left. As the diaphragm is moving and you're breathing, especially hard with exercise, you're pumping that entire system vigorously, detoxing the system. When you walk, when you move, the gut is moving with you strongly. You're increasing peristaltic action in the gut itself, in the gut tube. You make for more efficient elimination. Exercise is essential for that. You also start reducing inflammation through the entire body. How? By lymphatic drainage. By walking. I think we talked about this a little last time. Did we talk about the sump pump of the body? Yeah. The calves and the muscles of the pelvis. Go ahead.
Any exercise promote lymphatic drainage?
Walking does best to promote lymphatic drainage. You don't have to stand on your head, you can just walk. Much easier. Okay?
And it It's almost like I can't eat anything. Can I eat beans?
I'm glad you asked.
Can you give some
We're going to talk
practical?
about the foods that we're going to eat in a moment. But I give you this, and you're right on schedule, by the way. When I get to this part of the talk, even with patients, they go, so what can I eat? I say, great. So let's talk about that, okay? So, what I'm going with you, I go over with every one of my patients. And this is all written down. If you'd like, just call the office, we'll send you a copy. So let's talk about, what do you eat? What do you do to detoxify the system? How do we start changing this senescent zombie issue? How do we start reversing the aging process? How do we start reducing stresses in the system? You start by taking foods in that support life. Remember, we're designed to live and eat out of where? The garden. What do you find in the garden? Pardon? All right. Let's start at the top. Grains, legumes, beans, peas, lentils. These require cooking. You can do them raw, like raw oat flakes, but they've already been pulverized, so you can break them down. They require cooking to be able to access the protein and break down the fiber so you can access the protein. There's all kinds that are available to you. Now, here's what I've seen clinically. There's a certain kind of grain that I find many people have a hard time with, especially gluten grains. Wheat, rye, triticale, seitan, spelt. Wheat, I mentioned that one already. Spelt, yeah, seitan. Wheat's the most common. But in the gluten, it's been hybridized to become very highly gluten-based. And it creates what's called zonulin in the gut. Zonulin in the gut will cause the tight junctions of the gut cells. So here's a gut cell. And here's the lumen. This is where your nutrients are taken in. And between the gut cells are what are called tight junctions that hold them together. So that you take in large and small nutrients through the gut cell itself into the bloodstream to take it to the liver to metabolize it. That's how we're designed. When you eat foods that damage the tight junctions, these things break apart. Zonulin breaks those apart. Gluten triggers zonulin production in the gut enterocytes, the gut cells. So it breaks these apart commonly. Then you get what's called a so-called leaky gut. So you start taking nutrients in you shouldn't be able to, like macronutrients, and you don't take in micronutrients like minerals and vitamins that you should be able to take in. So you start creating a deficiency problem. Do you follow? You take in what you shouldn't and don't take in what you should. The things you take in that you shouldn't, we mentioned this last time, are chains of amino acids or proteins that the body sees as foreign and it tags them and it says you don't belong here. So this is what happens when gluten is eaten, as an example. Now, many patients I find when I test them are reactive to black beans, pinto beans, and navy beans, as well as soy. There's lots of other beans to work with. Some patients tolerate them just fine, but just see how you feel when you eat those foods. Black bean, navy bean, and pinto bean, as well as soy. If you find that you fall asleep after you eat them, you might not want to have as many as you do. Okay, simple way to tell. Now,
Can you list the beans they can eat?
all the rest.
Well,
Mung
do-
beans,
do
aduki beans,
people know what an adzuki bean is? Have you ever tasted? They're wonderful, and
black-eyed
like a
peas,
small red bean,
lima beans,
garbanzo beans.
garbanzos, cranberry beans, lentils, kidney beans, white beans, wax beans, pink beans, mung beans we mentioned, cannellini beans, pardon?
Cream powder beans. If you're down in Arkansas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, they're down there everywhere.
Sounds wonderful. I love giant beans. So there's all kinds of legumes available other than black bean, navy bean, and pinto bean. Just don't go to a Mexican restaurant around here and you'll do fine. Now, let's go further. Vegetables of all kinds. So vegetables are going to be leafy greens, roots and tubers, stalks, leaves of all sorts of things, cruciferous vegetables. Now, cruciferous vegetables like broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, they're best if you steam them. Okay, you break the fiber down, you can access kale is another. So steam those first, or bruise them. My wife does it that way. Cabbages, same thing. So veggies of all kinds. Now, proteins in the plant world are found in beans, cruciferous vegetables, and dark green leafy greens. Those are the principal proteins in the plant world. Now, you also have nuts and seeds. These are mainly fats. People think of them as proteins. They're principally fats, all kinds available to you. The most common antigen I find is with almonds. And almonds are sprayed before they're ever sold, even if they're organic. So just be aware that almonds can be an issue. Again, if you don't have to test, you can just test it in your own body. You eat it and you don't feel right, and especially if you want to fall asleep after the meal. It's just too dense for the system. Too much energy is required to metabolize that or detoxify it. Now, also, fruits of all kinds. Now, fruits are interesting. Fruits are high in sugar, thank you. So many people can tolerate fruits just fine. Some people have a harder time, type 1, type 1.5, type 2, type 3 diabetics. You know what type 3 diabetic is? It's an insulin-resistant type 3 called Alzheimer's. It's insulin resistance of the brain. So when you see this kind of thing, be careful with sugars, even fresh fruits. Now, for those people, I suggest limiting the fruit to what you can fit in a fist, palm down. Not palm up, palm down, okay? And best at the beginning of the meal. An orange is fine. Why the beginning of the meal? So what happens is if you have it at the beginning of the meal, you digest it quickly. And it doesn't stay in the stomach too long and ferment. And then turn to gas and alcohol, and you get bloated and drunk on your dessert. So you want to be attentive to that. So fruit, palm down. Help yourself. The last group, well, two groups, spices of all kinds. Now, there's one thing I found with spicy foods. There's one that shows up, especially with people that tend to be migraine sufferers. You know what that is? Garlic. As strange as that is. My mom was a migraine sufferer. She finally became a patient of mine. And I tested her, and garlic was high on her list. She cut out garlic, the migraine stopped. But I've seen that with many other migraine sufferers. So we test those things to know. But garlic is not uncommon as a migraine trigger. The last group are oils. Now, oils are a charged subject. You think about cholesterol, high fat issues, nut and seed oils, vegetable oils. Vegetable oils tend not to do well with us. Nut oils tend to do better. Olive oil is excellent. Coconut oil does fine. Now, I just finished reading a book, I think I mentioned last time, called by Malcolm Kendrick, The Clot Thickens. I mentioned it last time. Okay. I encourage its reading, by the way. It's a fun read. It's almost tongue-in-cheek, but it's very true to research. The last 150 years of research showing that cholesterol is not the issue in heart disease. The issue is inflammation. Inflammation is a huge issue. And inflammation increases the further down this slide we go, the more we go into senescence, which causes nothing but inflammation at the cell level. So it's a big deal. Oils can drive too much fat into the system. Obviously, we can't metabolize it. We can't digest it efficiently. But it also can drive up LDL cholesterol because cholesterol carries fat. So I just call them fat boats. Okay? So you have different forms of cholesterol, LDLs, HDLs, IDLs, and chylomicrons carrying fat through the system. So you take the fat in through the diet. the liver has to metabolize it and take it to the cells. So it carts it off by these cholesterol molecules. If you oversaturate too much fat on the cholesterol molecule, or the lipoprotein with cholesterol, some of that fat gets dumped along the way and creates what's called a fatty streak. The fatty streak will oxidize in the artery and then start doing damage to the artery. The damage is from the inflammation that it creates, causing red blood cells and platelets to come in. And the red blood cells is what brings the LDL cholesterol into that fatty streak that then oxidizes and does damage. Okay? So statins don't work. That's proven in the medical literature, by the way. It's proven in the medical literature. I'm not exaggerating here at all. So I take many of my patients off of statins. We get them on a proper diet, limit the amounts of fats and oils that are taken into the diet, and then limit the sugars to bring the triglycerides down, because sugars store as fats, and those fats are carried by chylomicrons. And a person with a high triglyceride level, you look at their blood, it looks like snow in the microscope. Fats just being carried through the bloodstream. So fats, oils, and sugars are huge issues that store them as fats in the body.
Can you speak about how much better and what ways we can get our fats, like through avocados and nuts, and they're not refined? Once they're refined, they're fractured, then what's the difference in how that affects your arteries?
So where we go with that is this. To get fats, nuts, organic seeds, avocados, those are the main issues. Nut butter, seed butters, and small amounts of oils. So when I see the LDL starting to climb, I say limit your oils to a tablespoon per meal. A tablespoon of nuts, seeds, nut butters, seed butters, and oils. Or half an avocado. Now these are patients with heart disease issues, with cholesterols that are starting to rise, LDL cholesterol, that are showing evidence of heart disease. Now when the research was done by Esselstyn, I mentioned this last time, he took his cardiac patients that were terminal cardiac patients, remember I mentioned, off of all fats, 100%, all fats, but I don't advocate that for my patients, unless they're a terminal cardiac case, then I do. But a tablespoon at a meal is generally enough for people that show inability to metabolize fats. Now that's about 60% of my patient population. The other 40% can metabolize fats and do fine, not a problem. I just measure the lipid chemistries. Now, so I've gone through the first slide of about 50. All right. So, that's okay. Now, I was asked a couple of questions that I want to address the first one. How can a person get rid of belly fat? Is that an issue? You don't have to raise your hand. It's okay. Belly fat or a mental fat is a big deal. Now, when I did the research on this one, I got this from the guy that got his PhD in it, teaching at the Department of Chemistry at Berkeley and Stanford. And he did it because it worked. And let me just share some basics with you. You want to know? Okay. Good. Huh. I didn't think I was going to get much resistance on that one. So the key is this. There are 4 parts to a meal. Reducing belly fat. Exercise is a big part of it, by the way. And virtually any kind of exercise, seriously. 10 minutes daily. It doesn't matter. I've looked at this in many different ways. Some have broken it down to like a minute every hour, where you just tighten the whole body. This guy that developed it was Dr. Wilson. He calls it shiver size and something. I'm literally, for 1 minute, I'm not exaggerating. I took a course from this guy recently. It was called shiver size or flexor size. So you just tighten the muscles body wide and you just quiver. Okay? But you're from head to toe, you're tightening everything for a minute.
Do a deer relax.
Don't you need to go 20 minutes at least to get your heart rate up?
Well, I'm going to look at exercise in several ways. So BDNF is brain-derived neurotropic factor. to let the brain regenerate. It requires 10 minutes a day of vigorous exercise. That's it, to stimulate that, okay? Now, for conditioning, as Rhonda's suggesting, 20 minutes a day does well. For that, I have my patients do what's called Peak 8. Heard of Peak 8 exercise? Okay. Peak 8. Peak 8 is very simple to do. It takes a 2-minute warm-up and a 2-minute cool down. Something happens in between. What happens is you go peak for 30 seconds. Whatever you do fast. Walk, swim, bike, push-ups. I have one patient in her late 70s that was doing push-ups, doing it this way. I was amazed. Very strong. Then you go a minute and a half going slow, not stop, slow. So you can go for a fast walk for 30 seconds, then slow down for a minute and a half, and then go for another 30-second peak until you've done that how many times? 8 times. Peak 8. We used to do peak 4. We used to do a minute full on and 3 minutes slow. That's a lot. So peak 8 is more humane. So you do 30-second all-out peak. And 30 seconds is a long time when you're pushing as hard as you can. Now, as hard as you can. There's no set measurement for what that has to look like, whatever works best for you. It's just, let's put it this way, it's hard to carry on a conversation when you're doing the peak exercise. But you can carry on a conversation when you slow down. So when you've done 8 30-second peaks, then you do a 2-minute cool down. That whole time frame is 20 minutes. That's what my wife is referring to. Okay? Now, what I have my patients ideally do is cardio, peak 8, every other day, and strengthening every other day. Strengthening is light weight training. Light weight training I define as 2 sets of 20 reps of whatever you're doing. Like one day you'll do biceps, triceps, and shoulders. 2 sets of 20. It's going to take about 10 minutes.
If you can't do 20 without stopping, you need to lighten up your weight. And some people, when we start them at our health retreats, they can't do anything. They have no weight, so they're doing
Right.
20 of these with nothing, and
So
then
the
they
key-
add a pound. But you have to be able to do 20 without stopping, or
Right.
you have to lower your weight.
So the key is 2 sets. If the only weight you can lift is your hand, that's fine. Or a soup can, or a pencil, I don't care. But you start with something. Movement. Some patients can't do more than 5. No problem. I have a patient I saw this last week. He could do 5. I said, great, we're going to start with 5 this week. We'll do 6 next week. Work up to 20, and then 2 sets. So biceps, triceps, shoulders one day, and abs. Then back, lats, and chest the next time. Then buttocks, thighs, and calves the next time. Just upper body, trunk, and lower body. And abs each time. Pardon? Abdominals each of those 3 days. So I suggest alternating peak 8 with light weight training for conditioning and strengthening, 6 days a week. Now, nature rests on Sabbath. Saturday, all nature rests consistently. So Saturday's off for good behavior. Okay.
How about dynamic tension exercise?
Dynamic what?
Dynamic tension, what we used to call dynamic tension, where you just press, you can actually wear yourself out, pulling your muscles up.
Help yourself. There's all kinds of ways of exercising, all kinds of ways, heavy weight training, lightweight training, that form, resistive training, whatever works best for you. But I'm suggesting for people that are not used to doing exercises, they're not bodybuilders, that they haven't experienced with that, we start with this. Yeah, I understand. I've studied with many bodybuilders. I've worked with bodybuilders in my practice. When I go to a gym, I find the best built guy I can find and say, how do you do that? And they love to share. So I've learned all kinds of ways of going about this. Now, let me go back to the diet. So, pardon? Belly fat, that's what I'm coming to now. I'm not going to leave you alone. So, with belly fat, there's 4 parts to a meal. This is what this guy that got his PhD found. The first is fruits and vegetables. Okay? Fruits, fist palm down, beginning of the meal. Could put with leafy greens, like in salads or green smoothies, no problem. And then your non-starchy veggies. Your starchy veggies are going to be roots and tubers and winter squashes. Okay? But all the rest of the veggies are the first part of the meal. Then you put in your moderate proteins. Proteins are going to be what? Your beans, leafy greens, and what else? Remember? Crucifers. Nope, that's fats. Those are the proteins. Those 3. The third is going to be whole grains and starches, so your starchy foods. And whole grains. Root vegetables and squashes, winter squashes, are your starches, and then the whole grains. I don't encourage gluten, but you have to see how you tolerate. And the last group are what I call quality fats. These are the nuts, seeds, avocados, nut butters, seed butters, and their oils. Nut oils especially. Pardon? Olives are part of that. That's right.
Do you include grapeseed oil in your good oil?
Ordinarily. Not a lot. So this covers the garden. You're eating from the garden. When people eat this way, you can have as much as you enjoy as you want to have. Careful with the fats and the sugars. Well, start always with fruits, and then the rest you can put together. Not a problem. So, not necessarily. You can have fruits at the beginning of the meal, the rest is later, if the digestive capacity is normal. Every once in a while, I'll find someone with a very weak digestive system, then we separate things out. But you see how you do.
Do you have a break between?
Pardon?
Do you have a break between? Like 30 minutes waiting?
No, not at all. Just have fruits first. I tell my patients, eat dessert first, and then follow the rest of the meal. But this has been consistent in terms of reducing belly fat. Now, when we do the retreats, my wife can address this one also. She does all the cooking and directs all the things we do at the retreats that we do here. We're almost done with the construction. It's been a long time, but we'll be in operation by next spring. But you want to comment to that, honey?
No, I just want to encourage anyone that's saying this, I don't know how to do this. If you just Google vegan recipes, you will get dozens of sites, and there are wonderful, now very easy recipes, all kinds of creative things, and you will find an abundance. Just Google it, and you'll see it. Or on Facebook, you can start marking that you want that, and then you'll get more and more of them sent
Right.
when you follow.
So, I could use more time. However, I respect my time constraint. So what I'm going to do when we come back to the next lecture after this one, we're going to go through with what happens in the endocrine system here, what happens with the wake-sleep cycle, why we don't sleep, why we stay in pain, why we stay inflamed from this whole stress response. I was hoping to get to it today, but food became a primary focus. Now, I'm not a cook. So I'm grateful my wife is here to address things like that. Pardon?
Talk about exercise.
Right.
And we went to meals, and was that it?
No. But there's another question back there.
When you had foods that were permitted, sauerkraut,
Sauerkraut's generally no problem.
it's okay to eat.
Yeah. I understand. But it's not going to disrupt digestion or cause proteins to ferment or rot or putrefy.
So everyone's wanting more on belly fat. That's
I
the
understand.
popular subject.
So here are the keys.
Lemon water.
Lemon water in the morning, first thing. Just squeeze a fresh lemon in a glass of water, and drink that down first thing in the morning. Now, pardon? Go ahead.
It's best if you start with 1 tablespoon of lemon juice when you first wake up in the morning and don't eat for about a half hour to 45 minutes because it alkalinizes your pH and it helps you then with belly fat. You can burn your fats better.
So when patients come to the retreats, a classical lube
Tablespoon in a glass of water. Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, if you can tolerate it, but you should start with a tablespoon because some people don't.
Just lemon. I just squeeze lemon. But my wife directs all those activities at the retreats. People typically lose about 1 pound a day when they come to the retreats. I've seen this routinely.
There's a phone number you
But-
can call
but-
me.
But they're
Give-
walking, but here's the key. They're walking daily, they get what peak 8 is, they exercise daily. They're eating this way, 2 meals a day, and no snacking. Remember, you interrupt digestion of the previous meal if you snack. So these are keys to getting water throughout the day and things to drink throughout the day that detoxify. We put them all in Pau d'Arco tea. They're drinking like a quart a day of Pau d'Arco tea to detoxify. We're supporting the detoxifying process on a daily, hourly basis. They're very physically active in detoxing the system. These are keys. But exercise, I have to stress. If you can't exercise and don't exercise, or you're not able to exercise, get on a little rebounder. Celercise we like to use. A rebounder with a good large sweet spot, and just heel toe bounce. That's all you can do. Start there. I think I mentioned last time, we have some patients that can't even do that. So we put their feet on the rebounder and we bounce for them to get the calves starting to move the lymphatics. Seriously. We do hot cold baths, things of this nature to get the circulation and immune system stimulated. But reducing the belly fat starts with this kind of a diet. No flesh foods, no refined carbs, no stimulants, no bad quality fats. It's about what you don't eat as much as what you do eat. Take out the things that are toxic and pro-inflammatory. Put in the things that are nutritious and life-giving from the garden. Remember, the garden does not generate massive amounts of fat or sugar. There's no fat dripping in the garden. And you're not going to find piles of sugar forming in the garden. Okay? They're not there. Our tastes have been so perverted by the food industry that we're accustomed to that. We think we want that or need that. We don't. When you start avoiding those things, you don't miss it. It doesn't even taste good. Now, so those are keys. Water through the day, detoxing through the day. Lemon juice in the morning is fine. Pau d'Arco D throughout the day we also use. Keeping the diet just this way, eating to satiation, by the way. You're not starving yourself. That's important. Many people think they have to eat less to lose weight. No, eat properly and exercise to lose the weight and the belly fat especially. Now, one real key in that is taking out all the pro-inflammatory triggers. A lot of belly fat is pro-inflammatory. It's inflammation. So you're taking out the pro-inflammatory triggers to let this come down. I see people routinely losing weight and cutting the belly levels down when they just do what we ask them to do this way.
If you really want to drop belly fat, you may also look up raw food recipes. We take people who want to lose weight, we put them on 100% raw for about 2 weeks, week and a half, 2 weeks, and you just peel it off.
Right.
It just comes off.
And there are awesome recipes that are raw
Yeah.
and vegan that work beautifully, that taste incredible. I love my wife's raw food pizza. You cannot believe it.
Well, we use a dehydrator.
Yeah.
Dehydrator, but you have to keep your temperature under 118 to keep the live enzymes. And when you're eating, but you could just eat lots of salads and try to have about 60 to 80% of your meal raw, and you will lose weight. You'll lose belly fat really fast.
Right. So, you had a question? Questions, herbal teas?
Can you use those as part of the water, or
You can. You actually can.
as long as you don't put sugar or sweet, right?
No sugar, no sweeteners, no creamers, nothing of that nature. Yeah.
They're asking about Party Arco tea for a mild liver cleanse,
Right.
and that really helps your whole body,
Right.
your metabolism step up when you get your liver clean. And the Party Arco, they wanted to know if you could spell it. You can get it on Amazon. And you just take a cup of the tea for 2 gallons of water. You boil your water really hard, dump the tea in, stir it once, put the lid on, leave it on the burner, and shut the burner off and leave it all night. And then you strain it through a strainer, put it in quart jars, and drink a quart a day.
So I know we've pushed the envelope with our time. So go ahead.
They want you.
Just a minute. Baking soda?
Good for inflammation,
Mm-mm.
It's not active for the.
No.
For inflammation.
Inflammation from
From baking soda? Go ahead.
You want me to answer that?
Sure.
It will turn your pH acidic, which is a disease-prone body, and it is an irritant to the colon. And people think that it helps their stomach or digestion, like taking Pepto-Bismol even and things like that, antacids. But it's masking the problem, and it's numbing your body like vinegar does. It's numbing your body, and it is not good for you. Your pH turns very acidic, and then you are disease prone.
So let your body
You
make
should
its
not
own.
be taking. No, but over time it will turn your body acidic. Yeah.
So let your body make its own sodium bicarbonate. The pancreas makes an immense amount of sodium bicarbonate to neutralize the acid from the stomach,
They want you to spell Party Arco up there.
right here,
Oh, there.
cardiarco. So, last question.
Pepto-Bismol, the primary ingredient is aluminum. Don't
Right.
ever take it.
No, Pepto-Bismol is a nonsense. So, what we're going to do next time is we're going to go through the chemistry of stress, the hormonal patterns of stress, especially relating to the adrenals, pancreas, and thyroid. We're going to look at the inflammatory sequence that happens from all that. We're going to look at the nutrients and botanicals that reduce inflammation and pain. We're going to look at the sleep issue, the insomnia issue related to cortisol and brain chemistry. We're going to look at anxiety related to brain chemistry, depression and OCD related to brain chemistry. This is a large subject that we started to tackle here. There's so much to it. And I deal with this every day of my career. Okay, I see this on a routine basis. Now, my wife and I are snowbirds. I and snow don't mix. I have no cold gene in my body. So when the snow flies, so do I. That's all I can say. So we're taking off in about a week to go south for the winter. We're going to go visit our kids in North Carolina. We go south from there. We're going to be doing a lot of lecturing and teaching on the East Coast, and maybe Colorado. We'll see on our way back. So when we come back in the spring, we have to be back by mid-March to finish our construction here. So when we come back, we'll let it be known, and we'll continue this routine, this series if you'd like. It's my pleasure to do this, but I'd like to give you a very practical understanding of how the body works further regarding stress and responses to it, affecting sleep and pain and inflammation and equanimity of the brain and of the mind. These are really critical subjects to deal with. And they're tackleable, they're manageable. And we see this, people recovering all the time from these kinds of issues. So I'm going to ask you to stay tuned till the spring, and I look forward to resuming. So next time we'll talk about nutrition, vitamins, minerals, nutrients, phytochemistry that affect all of that.